meet you all. I'm going to get water. Thank you. Okay, I will. I appreciate it.
Like, good, yes. Okay.
Everyone. One of the things that I always enjoy about this lecture every year is that there's so much good conversation and reunions and catching up beforehand. So I'll give you just a second to get settled. All right, my name is Melissa Gregory, and I'm the Dean of the Judith Herb College of Arts, Social Sciences, and Education at the University of Toledo. And I would like to welcome you to the annual Philip Markowicz Lecture in Judaism and Jewish Biblical Studies, which is supported by the Jewish Federation and Foundation of Greater Toledo. To those of you who are here in the Center for Performing Arts Recital Hall, thank you so much for being a part of our live audience. And to those of you who are joining us online, thank you for participating in our live stream. My thanks also to the Department of Music for providing this space for us, and to the Department of Communication and Media for providing our online viewers with live access. So my job tonight is to introduce our main speaker, Dr. Barry Jackisch, who is the Philip Markowicz Endowed Professor in Judaism and Jewish Biblical Studies. The Markowicz Endowed Professorship is named after Philip Markowicz, and I would actually like to pause here and share with you a little bit about this very remarkable man. He was just an extraordinary individual, and why this professorship is named for him. And it's a story that feels, I think, particularly resonant so close to Passover. So, Philip Markowicz was born the son of a rabbi in Poland in 1924. From all accounts, he was a Talmud prodigy, but the yeshiva education he was so dedicated to was interrupted by the Nazi invasion of Poland in 1939, which also disrupted and ultimately displaced Philip's entire life. So instead of becoming the rabbi he might have become, Philip had to endure and survive the very dark and violent times that followed the Nazi invasion of Europe. If you'd like to know more about Philip's personal history, I highly recommend that you read his autobiography, My Three Lives, which describes how he survived the ghetto of Łódź, several concentration camps, including Auschwitz, and a death march. With the exception of his brother, the rest of Philip's family was murdered by the Nazis. But Philip survived and was ultimately liberated by the Allies, after which he was sent to a displaced persons camp. It was in this camp that he met his wife, Ruth, and where they also started their family. When they had the opportunity to emigrate, they took it, journeying to Toledo. With no connections and no resources, Philip trained himself in electronics and created a thriving business in his new home city. Over his lifetime, Philip continued his passion for Torah study and wrote extensively in his retirement. In addition to My Three Lives, he also completed the manuscript for Losing God in Translation in 2017, shortly before his passing. Philip's children, Dr. Alan Markowicz and Professor Sylvia Markowicz-Neal, together with their spouses Hinda Markowicz and Daniel Fischel, led the creation of the Markowicz Endowed Professorship at the University of Toledo in honor of their father, and they have continued to support it for the past 2 decades. We are grateful for their gift and also for the support we have received from the Jewish Federation and Foundation of Greater Toledo for this lecture. And now it is time for me to introduce Dr. Barry Jackisch. Dr. Jackisch is the current Markowicz Endowed Professor. He received his Ph.D. in history from the State University of New York at Buffalo, and he currently works as an associate professor of history at the University of Toledo. Dr. Jackisch's research interests center on aspects of modern Germany, fascism, and the Holocaust. He has published a book entitled The Pan-German League and Radical Nationalist Politics in Interwar Germany between 1918 and 1939, and multiple articles on these subjects. At the University of Toledo, Dr. Jackisch teaches courses in comparative genocide, war and revolution in Europe, film and World War II, and the contemporary world. He has presented his research at multiple international conferences in North America and Europe, including his most recent paper presented in November 2025 at a major international Holocaust education conference at the University of Vienna. Dr. Jackisch's talk tonight is entitled New Approaches to Holocaust Education. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Barry Jackisch.
Dean Gregory, I very much appreciate that very kind introduction, and also the opportunity to reflect on the namesake of this endowed professorship that has made a real difference, I think, at the University of Toledo, and certainly through your father's life in the community as a whole. So I'm very grateful to be able to represent this endowed professorship and to have an opportunity to speak with all of you here tonight. You'll see from the image behind me, and you'll have to bear with some technical difficulties. We have, as you see, a fading light. Evidently, this bulb kind of zones in and out, and so we are working on trying to have it be more in the in status or bright status than the dark status, and we'll see what we can do about that. What I want to talk to you about tonight is a program that started about a year and a half ago. Much better, thank you very much. We'll see how it goes. That involves Holocaust education. I teach a course here at the University of Toledo, an upper level, a 4,000 level class on the history of the Holocaust. I also teach a course on Hitler and Nazi Germany, and a lower level 2,000 course on modern German history, in addition to many of the other courses, some of which Dean Gregory mentioned. One of the things that I've been interested in is the possibility of trying to communicate the work that I do in those courses with undergraduates, with middle school and high school teachers who in the state of Ohio are also hopefully having the opportunity to at least introduce some aspects of Holocaust education into their own curriculum. And so the origin of this program that I'm going to talk to you about tonight is exactly that. The conference that I presented at in Vienna back in November, the title of my talk for that presentation was called Teaching the Teachers. So I am trying my best to do that. Whether they're interested in learning from me or not is another question, but hopefully that works out. What do we know about the state of middle and high school education, Holocaust education specifically in Ohio and the United States? Right now, as of today, 27 out of 50 US states, not Ohio, it should be noted, currently have some kind of Holocaust teaching mandate. But the language varies widely, and I've given you 3 examples here. Delaware, which was a relatively early adopter of this, there specifically stipulates grade levels, grades 6 through 12, and implement a curriculum on the Holocaust and genocide. The state of Michigan's mandate is even more robust. Social studies curriculum, grades 8 to 12. Grade appropriate instruction about genocide, including but not limited to the Holocaust and the Armenian genocide. And then you have something as sparse as Oklahoma, and I gave you these to get a sense of the range. Oklahoma simply states starting in 2022 to 23, students in grades 6 through 12 in Oklahoma will be required to have Holocaust education. So all of these mandates are really kind of all over the place in terms of what they specifically require for teachers and school districts in each individual state. There is a growing body of scholarship on teaching mandates in general. Some of you who have a background, a career in teaching may realize that mandates are a very, let's say, controversial aspect of the teaching profession. Suffice it to say, having a mandate on something does not always imply that that mandate will be executed well, and that the content that you are mandating will be taught in the way that it would be most effective. Any of you who are teachers or education specialists will know that I'm hedging a little bit here. I'm not trying to take a particular side on this. I'm simply saying that mandates have pluses and minuses to them in many ways. This is also true with Holocaust mandates. What that has done in the state of Ohio, however, is generated some questions. And you'll see here, I think this is more broadly applicable beyond Ohio. How well prepared are teachers in general to teach the content they're being asked to do in terms of mandates? What content knowledge do they have? How do we present a subject, especially like the Holocaust, at various age-appropriate levels that does justice to the topic, and especially in this case, the millions of lives destroyed? So this is a very difficult challenge, and it's a challenge that every state sort of has to answer and address in its own way. 5 years ago now, which is hard to believe, the state of Ohio, the legislature, began the process of exploring the possibility of a Holocaust mandate. They are still not there yet, but they have been in discussion about that. In advance of a mandate, they created the Holocaust and Genocide Memorial and Education Commission. Created in 2021 by the Ohio legislature to promote Holocaust and genocide education, it is funded to improve teacher training, hosting workshops, trips abroad, and grants to individuals to develop educational programming. In 2024, I received one of these grants, a curriculum development grant, to do two things: create a new minor here at the University of Toledo in Holocaust and Genocide Studies, which when I last checked had either 4 or 5 registered minors, which is good. It's only been around for a year. And then to develop a fully online middle and high school teacher training program in Holocaust studies itself, which is what I want to talk about tonight. How does it work? Any student that participates in these fully online classes, one of them is complete, ready to go, and is up already. I'm going to walk you through some of that content tonight. That's going to be the large majority of my presentation. I have, and that's the one on the left here, the Introduction to the Holocaust course. The one on the right is one that I'm still working on. Those of you who are familiar with it will recognize the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe in that picture in central Berlin. And that course will do a lot with, as it implies, survivor stories and also how various countries that were affected by the Holocaust chose to recall and commemorate that experience. So that's the next course that I'm working on. The basic idea is that if a middle school or high school teacher decides to take one of these classes and successfully completes it, they will receive 3 continuing education unit credits, 3 CEU credits per course. So every teacher in every state, it varies the number of years toward renewal, but in the state of Ohio, you need to renew your license every 5 years. And so there is a particular requirement either for actual college course credit and or professional development credit, which are called CEU credits, and each one of these courses offers 3 CEUs per course. So the program is designed to help practicing teachers improve their Holocaust knowledge and teaching, and also get CEUs that can go toward their license renewal. Okay. So what I'd like to do at this point is walk you through this first course that I've actually developed called The Introduction to the Holocaust. There are several challenges that are involved in creating a fully online course when you are not a registered student at the university. Among those challenges is the fact that anyone who takes this course does not necessarily have library privileges or access. So in a normal college class that I would offer at the University of Toledo, I would have online readings, I would have students access e-textbooks, textbooks through the library, in addition to other books that they buy for the class. I can't do any of that in these classes. These have to be, in effect, fully self-contained units. Any written material that I use needs to be open source, meaning that I have permission from the publisher or whoever produced the written material that it can be reused and distributed for educational purposes, which is what I'm doing here. So everything that is here, including the textbook that I use for this particular class, I have some colleagues at Penn State University that have done a really good online textbook which is intended to be open source and used in this format. So I cite that, I give it the proper credit, and I use that as kind of the base textbook. So that's one of the challenges. One of the other challenges is, how do you strike a balance between asking teachers who are busy, who have their own lives, who are not just doing my class, but are going through and doing other CEU and professional development credits, to spend an appropriate amount of time to earn 3 continuing education unit credits on my class, okay? So in effect, when you sign up for any one of these classes, let's take this Introduction to the Holocaust class, you can take as long as you want. There are 5 modules in this class, and I'll show you this first one on anti-Semitism and Jewish life before the Holocaust. And you work through the content in this module. There is a 10-question quiz at the end of the module, and then once you're done with that, if you get at least 8 out of 10, it opens up the rest of the course, and you are allowed to go to Module 2, which is the rise of the Nazis, Module 3, outbreak of war and the acceleration of genocide, Module 4, the final solution and the peak of mass murder, and Module 5, death marches, liberation, and war's end. So anyone who signs up for this class will work through all these modules with an assessment, and you'll see here Module 1 quiz at the end. I can't pull that up unless you're actually taking it. Otherwise, we could all take one of the quizzes together. But what I would like to show you tonight is some of the content to give you an idea of what my approach to this class is. And I would like to thank Dean Gregory, because we talked this through. We kind of thought about what this might look like if we offered a CEU-based online course. And one of the things that I think both of us agreed on was the idea that we would want to try to have something distinct or unique about this particular course that UT Online is offering, and to give it a particular Ohio component. And I know I've been talking with Hinda and Alan Markowicz for quite a while about not only their father's books, but if we fast forward quickly here to Module 5, with their permission, one of the things you'll see in Module 5 is access to Holocaust survivors in Toledo, Ohio, a film that Hinda was, I believe, an associate producer on, is that correct? Called Bearing Witness, The Voices of Our Survivors. So one of the features of all of these classes is they have a local connection, in this case to 5 survivors who are featured in interviews in this particular video. So there are a few other fully online kind of CEU-based Holocaust education classes available, but this one is unique in terms of its Ohio content. It is also unique, for better or for worse, depending on whether or not you want to listen to me. You're a captive audience, so you're going to have to do a little bit more. Because one of the things that I wanted to bring into this process was my own experience at various Holocaust-related sites in Europe. So we'll tackle Module 1 here, which I've titled Anti-Semitism and Jewish Life Before the Holocaust. So I've borrowed and linked to a number of websites, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's overview of anti-Semitism, which is pretty detailed, a brief video on the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which has sadly, this conspiracy theory has been around for well over a century and is seeing a resurgence these days, unfortunately. And then another video that focuses on anti-Jewish discrimination in the sort of long-term scope of the last well over 1,000 years. But one of the things I also wanted to do with this course is not only talk about anti-Jewish persecution, but also give teachers who are taking this course a bit of a sense of Jewish life in Europe before the Nazis took power. And so the city that I decided to focus on, it's a city I've been familiar with, I've studied in before, and I was very happy to come back to, is a mid-sized city in what is today the central German state of Thuringia. And that city is Erfurt, Germany. It's possible maybe a couple of people in here have been to Erfurt before, I don't know. Very recently, March of 2025, I spent several days in Erfurt researching and collecting information on the history of the city's Jewish community, which dates back to at least the late 11th or early 12th century. And so what I wanted to do in this, this particular section here is talk a bit about the history of Erfurt's Jewish community, try to restore some sense of how important it was to the city's overall history, and also try to understand the long-term sense of anti-Jewish persecution that was quite common in much of Central Europe at this time. The building that I am standing in front of, and I'm going to play this video for you, is the oldest still standing from ground to roof synagogue building in Central Europe. It is no longer a functioning synagogue. It has not been a functioning synagogue for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it has a fascinating history about how it was basically lost to history when in the 15th century there were two major waves of anti-Jewish expulsions from Erfurt. The second one came in the 15th century when this synagogue was shut down. It became a grain storage depot, and eventually by the 19th century it had been turned into a local restaurant. And much of its history originally as a synagogue had been lost. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, and with renewed scholarly interest in the lives of Erfurt's Jewish population, a number of scholars and also architects came together and were able, through documentation, to realize that we have at least the outer shell of Erfurt's main synagogue, which dates back to the 12th century. Now, it is an excellent museum today, which houses some really interesting exhibits. But one of the things that I try to do with this course is to give students who have never been to a place like Erfurt or seen something like this a sense of what these buildings and what these sites are. A few years after they rediscovered this synagogue building in Erfurt, they also, when they were doing construction in the central city, unearthed a mikveh, which was, both of these are incredibly moving experiences, so I'm going to show you both of these videos, and then I'll move on to a couple other sections of the class. And so the idea here is to at least give students that take this course a bit of a slice of the experience of Jewish life in Erfurt. So I'm going to run these videos, and this is what a student would see in addition to doing background reading on anti-Semitism, Jewish life in Europe before the Holocaust. This is a really excellent gallery that shows, pictures of families and the wide range of the Jewish experience in Germany and in other countries to introduce students to this. and then background on the Erfurt community. So I'll show you this. It's 4.5 minutes, and then I'll show you the short video on Erfurt.
Hello. I'm coming to you today from the central German city of Erfurt, and behind me is the oldest existing synagogue building in all of Central Europe. Although the building is no longer used as a religious space, it is in fact an excellent museum with a collection that relates to Jewish life in Erfurt in the well over 1,000 years that Jewish people have been here. The building itself is a remarkable find, archaeologically, architecturally, and also a very powerful testament to the place of Jews in Erfurt. Jews date back to the 11th century, according to documentation in this city. In March of 1349, almost to the day, 676 years ago that I'm talking to you today, between 900 and 1,000 Jews, the entire Jewish population of Erfurt, was rounded up by their Christian fellow citizens and murdered. Why did this terrible act happen? Only months before, the Black Death or bubonic plague had reached Erfurt and was wreaking havoc on the population. Long before medicine could tell people exactly why this was happening, they blamed a number of different things. As deeply superstitious and religious people, on the one hand, they believed God was punishing them with this disease. Those who believed that turned against their fellow citizens who were not Christians and believed that by wiping out unbelievers, they would be able to assuage God, please God, and stop him from taking more lives through this dreaded disease. But there was also the widespread anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic belief that Jews, in fact, were poisoning the drinking water in the wells in the city of Erfurt. These claims happened quite frequently throughout the Middle Ages, and they were the case here in Erfurt. In any case, all of these conspiracies and false beliefs led to the deaths of between 900 and 1,000 Jews in Erfurt in March of 1349. The entire Jewish population was, in fact, wiped out. A few years later, after the disease ran its course, new Jewish families were welcomed back into Erfurt and reestablished themselves, some of them using this synagogue, some of them taking up new residences throughout much of what had been the traditional and historic Jewish area. However, within about 100 years, by the time of the 1450s, the city government decided to expel permanently all Jews in the city of Erfurt by the end of the 1450s. They were expelled and moved further east to Poland, to what is today the Baltic states, parts of Russia, and other parts of Eastern Europe. Since the end of the 1450s, no Jews lived in Erfurt. Jews only returned roughly 500 years later, during the Napoleonic period in the year 1811. So for almost 500 years, no Jews lived in Erfurt. And Jews finally were able to reestablish themselves in the city in the 19th century, building businesses, prospering, constructing a new synagogue, which was then in turn subsequently destroyed in Kristallnacht by the Nazis in November of 1938, before many of the descendants of the Jews who returned in the 19th century were themselves again deported to the death camps in the East and other Nazi concentration camps, so that only a handful of Jews who had reestablished themselves in the city of Erfurt actually survived the Second World War and the Holocaust and returned to the city or emigrated to countries outside of Germany. This is a fascinating story. It's one in which I'll go into much more detail, provide you with information from this museum and from the interesting research that has been done in the last 20 or so years about the Jewish population in Erfurt and the building behind me. I welcome you to this discussion, and I look forward to working on this interesting chapter in Jewish German history with you. Thank you.
So there are then, and again, for the purpose of time, I'm not going to go through all of the videos that are in this class, but there is a fantastic educational website. It's in both German and in this case it's in English, that students will then go through, and this will be part of their assessment, to learn more about the Jewish experience in Erfurt, and that's linked. Then they can look at that before and after that particular video. The mikveh, or ritual bath, is only several hundred yards from that old synagogue building, near the river that runs through central Erfurt. And it was rediscovered, and they began a preservation effort only in 2007. And it was discovered by complete and total accident. It sits in an area of prime real estate, and they have basically sort of refurbished all of central Erfurt. That has been going on since the collapse of communism. Erfurt and Thuringia was in former East Germany, and so a lot of the sort of renewal efforts in the central city led in the early 2000s to the discovery of this mikveh, which had been built over by several buildings. And I'll show you what the area looked like really briefly. But I asked before students look at the video itself that they get a general description of why a mikveh was important. There have only been a few of these that have been found. There's another one in Trier, for example, that date back as far back as this one does in Erfurt. And there, again, here is a link that has extensive information on, again, why this is particularly significant, not only in the Jewish religious tradition, but also in terms of how we think about Jewish populations in Central Europe. So just to give you an idea of where this is located, I'll show you this quickly.
Und dann ist bei so einer Mikve, egal wo, immer die Frage, wie macht man es zugänglich? Legt man eine Plexiglasscheibe drüber? Das ist in Köln mal passiert, ne? Aber durch Sonne und Feuchtigkeit, irgendwie ist es ja doch feucht.
Has a glass opening in it where you can look from the top down into the mikveh. So when the view is from the top down, it's really interesting. And then I'll show you the one. It is not open to the public. This woman gave tours, and I contacted her before I got there to make sure that I would be able to get access to it. So again, this is the location, and it had been built up over the years.
Der Architekt hat gesagt, Sie sollen auf Gott vertrauen. Sie können mir vertrauen, es gibt auch keine Stufen.
And it required some reinforcing and rebuilding, and now they have free tours that allow you to access this, but it's not just open to the public for a number of different reasons. Okay, so this is the bulk of unit or module 1, Anti-Semitism in Jewish Life Before the Holocaust. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. I've picked out a few that I hope are interesting. This section on the rise of the Nazis includes one of my own PowerPoint lectures, along with a political overview of the rise of National Socialism. It also looks into the collapse of Weimar Germany, the role of eugenics in Nazi thought. And it also focuses at great length on a full day that I spent at Buchenwald concentration camp, which is not terribly far from Erfurt. Buchenwald is also located in the central German state of Thuringia, outside of the historically important city of Weimar. And I'm not going to play these videos, but I talk at length about the Buchenwald camp, its history, the victims of Buchenwald. About 280,000 went through this camp. Of those 280,000, about 58,000 were murdered in Buchenwald. It's notable in part, many Americans are quite familiar with the name Buchenwald, in part because Dwight Eisenhower and George Patton, at the end of the war, it was the American Third Army that liberated Buchenwald. And I have an interesting teaching piece at the end of this course from an African-American soldier who was there at Buchenwald the day that it was liberated. And so Eisenhower and Patton went to one of the what are called sub-camps of Buchenwald and were shocked and horrified. And it was there that Eisenhower said, it's important that we record this in detail so that future generations don't forget what this actually was. So I go through, do sort of a full tour around what is left of the Buchenwald camp, and then I have a brief PowerPoint here with images from the camp, the sort of disgusting, sarcastic sign there in German that says Jedem das Sein, which is a kind of tongue-in-cheek joke by the SS that said to each his own. So, which of course was not the case. These were the arrest cells where prisoner torture occurred, and most people who were executed spent their last night in one of these cells. This is the large-scale crematorium that was built on site. One of the interesting things that I talk about in this course, and that is what I am going to talk about in some detail tonight, is the question that I often get in my Holocaust and other classes, which is how much did quote-unquote regular non-Jewish Germans know about what was happening to Jews in Germany? And after the war, some of my students will recognize that I've said this, they suddenly suffered collective amnesia. No one knew anything. We didn't know. We had no idea what was happening. My God, if we'd have known, we'd have done more, et cetera, et cetera. But in fact, the more that scholars spend time on this question, they found that they would have known a great deal, and would have known, in some cases, in detail what was going on, and I'll give you some evidence of that. The company that built the crematoria ovens, the Topf and Son company that built the crematoria at Buchenwald, comes from also from Erfurt, and I'm going to show you a video on that in just a minute. And they built this high-capacity oven to handle the large numbers of murders that occurred at Buchenwald. The museum there offers here prisoner identification, uniforms, a picture of Jews deported from Vienna, including a large number of individuals that had been forcibly removed from what we would call assisted living facilities and deported directly to Buchenwald at the Assembly Platz, Assembly Square in Buchenwald. Prisoner art, which was all part of this museum. And then I begin sort of hinting at what did regular Germans know about the camp. Buchenwald is located only about 8 miles outside the city of Weimar. Merchants in the city of Weimar brought supplies into Buchenwald on a regular basis. Before they built the large-scale crematoria at Buchenwald, they actually brought bodies of those who had been murdered into the city crematoria in Weimar, and the capacity was finally overwhelmed, which is what led to them creating this new crematoria at Buchenwald itself. So the point here is what was going on was generally widely known, whether people wanted to admit that particular fact or not. So I begin that process. What did Germans know? When did they know it? Okay. I will go through this one really quickly. Module 3, the acceleration of war and genocide. In this particular unit, I spend quite a bit of time at the Wannsee Conference House, which is an elaborate mansion southwest of Berlin, most notably known for the infamous conference that took place there in January of 1942, overseen and run by Reinhard Heydrich, which basically orchestrated what we have come to call and what they themselves referred to as the final solution, namely the mass gassing of European Jews. And so I also visit that house and talk about its place in history at some length. I have students watch the Wannsee Conference film, Conspiracy, from 2001. And then there is the quiz at the end of that unit. So Module 3 talks an awful lot about the relationship between war and genocide. One of the topics that is often overlooked about the Holocaust is we can't think of the scale of killing that took place, especially in Poland and in other parts of Eastern Europe, without understanding that against the backdrop of and the interaction between the Holocaust and the Second World War. Okay, so what I want to focus on for the remainder of my talk, and then I'm happy to take your questions, is Module 4, the final solution and the peak of mass murder. And I have quite a few documents, a couple of videos on Auschwitz itself, including the so-called Auschwitz album, about the daily aspects of SS life at Auschwitz. Disgusting, but it is interesting to understand the contrast between what the perpetrators were involved in and how they thought of themselves as perpetrators, as masters, in effect, in their own world, in relation to the millions who suffered in that camp, 1.3 million people at Auschwitz-Birkenau in total. And then I move into two examples, and these are the last videos that I want to show you today. The first is at the Topf & Son oven building company in Erfurt, Germany. The first time, full disclosure, that I went through this museum, I was absolutely floored. So going back to this and standing in front of this museum and giving this presentation was a difficult process. Topf & Sons company, as I'll show you in this video, made two things that became directly involved in the mass murder of the final solution. They made large 8-baffle ovens, which were used for mass-scale incineration, and they also made blowers, which allowed for the more rapid clearing of gas chambers, which allowed for a more rapid turnover and faster pace of killing. Erfurt, Germany, classic German town, central of the middle of the country, sent engineers who designed these blowers and designed these ovens on site to Auschwitz-Birkenau and other camps to install them and to make sure that they were working properly. And one of the things that the foundation, the J.A. Topf Foundation, and the museum there is excellent now, did a great job of was retaining as many of the records, the documentation. One of the things I'll show you in just a couple of minutes is an actual overtime sheet that one of the engineers turned in from his site, from his visit to Auschwitz to install the crematoria ovens.
So I'll show you this video, and then I will get to the other case study that I have in here, which is the Track 17 deportation site in Berlin. Hello and welcome back. Today I'm coming to you from Erfurt, Germany, and I'm standing in front of what is left of what was once a much larger manufacturing complex on the eastern side of the city of Erfurt. Behind me is the renovated headquarters building, which now serves as a museum of the J.A. Topf and Company, T-O-P-F. This was a very well-known Erfurt business, which was begun in the late 19th century and specialized ultimately in the creation of large industrial-scale furnaces, which could be applied or used for manufacturing centers and especially crematoria. The J.A. Topf Company would likely have remained a prosperous, well-known regional business had it not been for the contracts that the Topf Company signed starting in the late 1930s and the early 1940s with the SS and other Nazi organizations to provide ever larger scale industrial size crematoria ovens for both the concentration camps and ultimately the death camps that the Nazis would establish throughout Poland. The Topf Company is notoriously known as the creators of the massive crematoria ovens that came into use at Auschwitz in 1942 and ultimately 1943. This company also designed blowers and fans that allowed for a quicker clearing of the gas chambers after their victims had been killed. All in all, the Topf Company did extensive business with the Nazi Party and the SS. This museum, again, located in the former headquarters, the business center, the heart of the Topf Company, documents meticulously the way in which the Topf Company worked with Nazi agencies and especially with the SS. In further work that you will see in this class, we will see extensive documentation that shows how engineers from the Topf Company who worked here behind me in Erfurt traveled to various concentration camps like Buchenwald, less than 20 miles away, and much further to huge extermination camps like Auschwitz in Poland, in order to install the ovens as engineers, to make sure that they were functioning properly, and thus a number of their engineers actually witnessed gassings and cremations of men, women, and children to ensure that their ovens and blowers for the gas chambers were working working the way that they were designed to work. And then came back to company headquarters here behind me and reported on the progress of these products. What we see here is further evidence not only of the mechanism of the Holocaust, but also the way in which private German companies, including very well-known companies like the Topf Company, were directly involved in the process of mass killing that we know as the Holocaust and the final solution. Sadly, many people who try to deny the Holocaust take issue with the idea that there even were crematoria ovens or that there were gas chambers. This important museum exhibit in the building behind me will put any of those doubts very clearly to rest. Not only were there massive industrial scale cremation ovens provided by the Topf Company, but the blowers that were designed to clear out the gas chambers more quickly and thus allow a higher turnover rate of new victims to be brought in once the gas and the bodies of the previously murdered had been cleared out, is clear evidence of the way that the mass factory-style killing that took place at centers like Auschwitz in Poland were developed and implemented and put into place. We will talk more about this industrial scale of killing and the way in which German companies like the one behind me actively, willingly participated in this process, and indeed, as we see in the documentation in this now museum behind me, profited from the ovens, the designs, including the trademark designs, one of the ways that we know that these ovens were developed, profited from the human suffering that was at the center of the final solution implemented by the Nazis. We'll talk more about these ideas as we move forward. I appreciate you guys for the sound quality because it was quite windy that day that I was there. And that is then accompanied by this PowerPoint. And I'll go through this quickly and then get to the last video that I wanted to share with you. These are exhibits from the museum with actual interviews. Here is a lead top company engineer who oversaw installation of gas chamber ventilation systems and crematoria. Took multiple trips back and forth between the top company headquarters and Auschwitz-Birkenau. Here is, this struck me in particular, an overtime card, pay card from top engineer Heinrich Messing. 35 hours of overtime during a 1-week site visit in March of '43 to Auschwitz-Birkenau to install blowers and ventilation system in the basement gas chambers. And Kurt Prüfer, who in an interview, he was captured by the Soviets, and when he was debriefed in Moscow, he is asked point blank in the transcripts, did you yourself know the purpose for which the company was building crematoria and gas chambers in the concentration camps? And he admits very clearly that he does in his visit to the camp in 1943. And at the end, they ask, this means that while you were working on the construction of incineration ovens for the Auschwitz concentration camp, you already knew they were being built to exterminate innocent people. His answer, yes, I knew that. So this is part one of this. The second is, and this is the last video I'll share with you so that we have time for some questions and some discussion, is pursuing, again, this question of what does it mean to isolate and identify and deport hundreds of thousands of your fellow citizens from a big city, in this case, like Berlin, and other cities, medium-sized cities like Erfurt around Germany, and then multiply that times many other cases with the deportations that took place throughout Europe. And one of the really moving sites that reminds us of the question of deportation, roughly over 50,000 Jewish residents of Berlin were deported from this particular site on the western side of Berlin. There is now a memorial there called Train Track number 17. And so I visited that site. I've been there several times, taken students there previously. And I'm struck by both the act of commemoration that took place there, but also by the fact that this freight train loading site is maybe 200 to 300 yards away from an active Berlin metro station called the Grunewald station. The vast majority of Berlin Jews who were deported from Track 17 were marched to Track 17, and there's only one way in and one way out. And it's past the operating Grunewald
train station that other non-Jewish Germans would have used. Again, the question of what was happening to your neighbors and other people who were disappearing would have been impossible to avoid. You could have desired to want to not know that it was happening, but the idea that you didn't know is not the case. So I'll go through this and then I'll handle some of your questions.
Hello. I'm coming to you today from Berlin's Grunewald train station. If you were to look at a map of Berlin, you would find the Grunewald train station on the far western outskirts of the city. It's about a 25 to 30 minute train ride from central Berlin. The part of the city in which the station is located is one of the greenest and also wealthiest suburbs, and has been so since the end of the 19th century. What is even more remarkable about the site where I am today, which is referred to as the Track 17 Memorial, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Track 17 is just in this video right over my shoulder here. What's remarkable about this location is that the Grunewald train station is not just a historical artifact. It is in fact still a functioning train station and is part of the Berlin public transportation network. You'll see in some of the images that I've attached elsewhere in this lecture the main train station that is still used today by thousands of people every day as part of the larger Metro Berlin transportation network. In the 1940s, this site, which was used for long distance train, not for local trains in Berlin, but this particular track, which is maybe only a couple hundred yards away from the Berlin city transportation site. This track, Track 17, was used for long-range transportation trains used to haul goods and products elsewhere in Germany. Beginning in October of 1941, many of the trains that left from this particular site, from Track 17, were used not to transport goods and products, but were used to transport the first of over 50,000 of Berlin's Jews to areas to the east to be murdered. One of the remarkable things that we know about this site is the very close proximity of this transportation platform, where thousands upon thousands of Berlin's Jewish residents were marched up a hill to this platform and loaded on transport trains, often cattle cars, and sent to the east. And this was done within a couple of hundred yards of, again, a major public transportation site that non-Jewish Berliners used on a daily basis. For decades after the end of the Second World War, the German railways refused to deal with their role in the Holocaust. This is one of the most remarkable examples of historical blind spot for such a massive company and a system that was so incremental, it was so instrumental in the deportation of Jews from Germany to the east. Without trains, without railway lines like the one that you see behind me here, the mass removal of Jews from Germany and other parts of Europe to the death camps in the east simply would not have been possible. So the fact that it took as long as it did for the German railway system, the Deutsche Bahn as it's known in Germany, to acknowledge its role in the Holocaust and also to begin to take steps to commemorate and to memorialize the terrible actions that it took in the Second World War is another contribution, as we've talked about elsewhere in this course, to the whole question of memory and how a nation makes sense of what it has committed, and in this case, how does Germany think about and remember, not only in terms of public commemoration, but how do private companies, like the German railway system, deal with their responsibilities for the terrible crimes that were committed, and of which they were a major part during the Third Reich. So this site is interesting on many different levels. In many ways, it is a haunting site. If you travel to the Track 17 Memorial, where I am right now, you will actually come here quite conveniently on Berlin public transportation. You'll get out at the Berlin public transportation track, again, which is only a couple of 100 yards from here, and you'll walk up a hill, and here you are at one of the 3 main deportation sites for Berlin Jews. So again, one of the things that you're struck by in coming here is the incredibly close proximity of this particular deportation site and this track to a regularly functioning Berlin train station. This raises the issue that we brought up at other times of what did quote-unquote average Germans, non-Jewish Germans, know about the Holocaust, know about what was happening to their fellow citizens who were disappearing. And certainly in this particular case, as with the other 2 major deportation sites for Jews in Berlin, it is absolutely impossible for people to have overlooked the fact that large groups of their fellow citizens, perhaps people that they themselves would have identified as Jews, were being marched to this separate track and loaded not onto regular passenger trains, but onto freight trains to be deported to the east, never to return. So we are confronted not only with the weight of history. You can perhaps hear in the background of this video a train that just passed by. Again, we are at a functioning train station. We are confronted not just with the weight of history, but also the idea of memory. Basically starting at the beginning of the 1990s, a number of artists commissioned a couple of installations to make sure that this site would commemorate the terrible crime of deportation. By the late 1990s and the early 2000s, the site was completely closed down, and the official, as it's called, Track 17 Memorial was created. What you will see following this very short talk are a series of pictures and additional video material that give you some sense of what this site tries to do. Several things are important to keep in mind. One of the things that you will note as you see the subsequent images in this presentation is that this track, out of commitment to the crimes of the past, this track is permanently closed and will never be used again, either to transport goods or, thankfully, people anywhere. One of the really striking features that you will note of this memorial is the interplay between the track itself and nature. One of the intentional ideas that the creators of this monument had was to convey the sense that this track will never again be used by allowing trees to actually grow up in and alongside the tracks, and you'll see that in the images. It's a very powerful symbol of the commitment to make sure that this terrible action that took place here in Grunewald does not occur again. Another thing, and a very important piece of this memorial, are the over 180 iron plaques that line the platform where tens of thousands of Berlin's Jews would have stood and waited to be boarded onto trains. And these iron platforms give the exact dates and the locations of where Jews were deported in the East. And I'll be showing you images of that as well in a minute. So this is a very powerful memorial. It brings to mind the interplay between what we might think of as ongoing, quote-unquote, regular life in Berlin during the Second World War that was operating at exactly the same time as the Nazi regime was deporting and murdering tens of thousands of Berlin's fellow citizens. So we're struck by that contradiction here at Grunewald Track 17. And I think we're also struck by the way that both the German railway system and their government partners here in Berlin have decided not only to close the track, but to use this site as a way of quietly remembering and commemorating the terrible crimes that took place here. So I hope you find this site as meaningful as I do. And in the subsequent material that I'll post here, you'll get a sense, both through the videos and the images, of the way that the designers of this installation have tried not only to remember the lives of the thousands of people who were deported, but to express the commitment that something like this will never again happen at this site. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And I'll be back with more later.
Okay, so very quickly, students are then directed to these photos. So again, here is a picture of Track 17. You'll notice the tracks here and the trees growing in the middle. About 250 yards or so from this platform, this freight shipping platform, is this quaint sort of castle, mini castle-like Berlin metro station. It's the Grunewald subway stop. Still functions. Basically was untouched by the war, was not damaged. So if you want to go out to Track 17, and in German this is Mahnmalgleis 17, Track 17, you show up in this train station and you walk about 200 yards up the hill. This is a picture from Track 17. This is the little train station. Here's Track 17 and there's the train station right there. So that gives you a sense of proximity between these two. Okay. This Polish artist, Karol Brontowski, was invited to install this concrete block in 1991, which I think is a particularly powerful testimony. This is between the two sites, the regular Grunewald train station and Track 17, and it's negative imprints of human bodies, remembering the forced marches of thousands of Jewish victims to the deportation stations like Platform 17. It's a very powerful installation. And then the 186 iron plates installed on the platform. That commemorates the specific date, the number of Jewish people who were deported, and their destination. So you can see on the left here, the 29th of November 1942, 1,000 Jews deported from Berlin to Auschwitz. And this gives you some sense of how long this process went on. 27th of March, 1945. So we're talking about not even 2 months until the war was over. 18 Jews that were deported from Berlin to Theresienstadt. And here is the commemorative plaque at Track 17 in memory of the 50,000 Berlin Jews who were deported between October 1941 and February 1945 by the Nazi state, that should actually say March, from the freight rail line Grunewald to death camps where they were murdered. Let this serve as a reminder to us to resist courageously and without hesitation any disregard for human life and the dignity of the individual. And I would like to leave you, this is very short, it's only 2 minutes, with a walk around of Track 17. And then I'll be happy to take some questions. So the course concludes with Module 5, Death Marches, Liberation, and War's End, which I showed you briefly before. And one of the other features of this is a section on learning materials and activities, which includes a number of lesson plans, links to teaching materials, teacher resources and lesson plans. From the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, Yad Vashem, Echoes and Reflections, Teaching the Holocaust, Inspiring the Classroom, and then a number of course-specific resources, again, from these sites that teachers would have seen in taking the course, that they might be able to build some of the video content or some of the other material that I included in here into their own classes. So what are some of the big questions that are still out there that I've learned a lot in the process of putting this together? It's a very different and has been a very different process than my regular courses that I've taught at the University of Toledo. And I always had to think, how do you make specific content for CEU courses like Holocaust education attractive to busy teachers with a lot of other options? How do we use survivor testimony in these types of classes effectively and with appropriate sensitivity? What are the strengths and weaknesses of Holocaust teaching mandates? Are they effective? One of the things that I'm interested in working on in the future, and I met some colleagues at that conference that I mentioned at the University of Vienna, is to look at the relative effectiveness and funding and support for Holocaust teaching mandates in the United States as compared to Austria and Germany, and to look at longitudinal effectiveness and what mandates do in terms of raising awareness over multiple generations about the Holocaust. How do we teach anti-Semitism, both in its long-term historic role in the Holocaust and in its current robust manifestation? After I'm done with the course on memory that I'm working on right now, the next course that I'm going to do is actually a standalone course on the history of anti-Semitism as an idea. How do we present sometimes nuanced scholarly research on the complex history of Nazi Germany, World War II, and the Holocaust in ways that translate well for middle and high school teachers, and in turn, their students? So these are all some of the things that have gone through my mind, in addition to a lot of other things. And I would welcome any questions or comments or suggestions that you have. Thank you. Alan, and then here, yep. I have none so far. What's that? The question, oh, we have a microphone. The question was how many have signed up for the course so far, and we are in the rollout stage, and so far no one has signed up for the course yet. So I am in the process of working with partners to get the word out to garner teacher interest in the class. What's that? Well, I contacted the Ohio Holocaust and Genocide Foundation. I've reached out to a lot of individual partners. The university has also been promoting it, so I'm open to any suggestions or ideas beyond what we've done already.
We do have some partner schools that will be sending a new kind of round out. It takes a while, I think, for something like this to get traction since it's new.
Yep.
But I would also say, anyone in this audience who would like to be an advocate, if you'd like to click and repost on any of the links, please feel free, since sometimes word of mouth can actually do a lot.
Does it cost money, and how is that?
Great question, and I didn't talk about that before. The course itself is $300. All you do, You do not register as a student at the university. You follow the link to the course, you click on the course, it'll bring up a page that allows you to pay the $300 fee with a credit card, and you're in. If you are an Ohio resident and you teach in the state of Ohio, the Ohio Holocaust and Genocide Commission that I mentioned before will reimburse your cost for the course, so it is net free. Once you have completed the course, you get a certificate at the end that has your name, and it has the University of Toledo, UT online. It says what course you completed, how many CEUs, credits that you got for the course, and if you submit that certificate to a very simple link through the Ohio Holocaust and Genocide Commission, they will reimburse the $300. So if you are an Ohio teacher, it is, as I said, net free. Okay, yeah.
A point of interest, you talk about history and you talk about memory. In Hebrew, there is no Hebrew word for history. It doesn't exist. If someone takes a course in history at University of Tel Aviv, it's Historia. What we have is memory. So we don't have history. We remember and remember and remember.
I think that's a very powerful comment, and I very much appreciate that perspective. One of the things that I'm trying to balance with this class is to introduce some basic ideas to teachers that are taking it who may know almost nothing about the subject. So it's difficult to provide some sort of more general background and also go into a great deal of detail on a lot of these subjects. That is an excellent point. It's an idea that students should probably be exposed to. I'm doing the best I can to move that process forward.
With memory, it suggests that we were there.
Right.
That we own it. We may not own history, but we sure as heck own memory. So it's incredibly powerful concept.
I agree with that, and I very much appreciate that comment. That is a very powerful concept. Yeah.
From what you know directly about Ohio and might have heard about the other states.
Could we use a microphone because if the live stream would.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
sorry. From what you know about Ohio directly and what you might have heard about the other states that haven't adopted this requirement, what kind of things are holding it up? And I'm specifically thinking if there's any backlash, like in talking about slavery, now we're getting the idea that really maybe it wasn't all that bad and they don't want to introduce it into school systems in, let's say, the southern states. Is any of that going on in opposition to adopting this in the 23 states that haven't?
I cannot speak to all of those states, and so I won't try to. I know that the whole idea of creating the Ohio Holocaust and Genocide Network was, I think, a genuine intention by the Ohio legislature to bring attention to this particular issue. They have funded that organization pretty substantially. They just refunded it again in their 2-year biennial cycle. And I think there is a genuine commitment to improving Holocaust education on a broad scale in the state of Ohio. I was there at the State House last January, in 2025, for the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And specifically, it was on the 27th of January, which is the liberation of Auschwitz by the Red Army. So that is International Holocaust Remembrance Day that happens in January. And I gave a keynote talk there, and spoke for about 10 minutes with Governor DeWine, whose father was actually present at the liberation of Dachau. And so I think, without speculating about what every individual member of the legislature may think, I think there is a genuine effort there to try to do something to improve Holocaust education in this state. Saying that, I think it is also true perhaps in other states or states that do not yet have a mandate. I think there is a pedagogical debate about how effective mandates are. I think that is a legitimate debate. I think, unfortunately, perhaps in some other cases, there are individuals who believe that we've heard enough about the Holocaust and about anti-Semitism, and we don't need to burden our students with that topic anymore. I think both of those things, unfortunately, are true. My own experience with this organization in Ohio has been very good, and I think there is a genuine commitment to improving Holocaust education overall. That's how I would answer that. Yeah.
Professor, thank you for your efforts to put together this excellent and very important curriculum. You mentioned that for Ohio educators, there's a net zero cost.
Yeah.
Other than a lack of funders, are there any ethical or other restrictions that would prohibit incentivizing teachers to take the course if they received grants for doing so?
None that I can think of. I mean, if I recall the numbers, and again, if there are teacher experts in here, please correct me. I believe, so renewal happens every 5 years of licensure in the state of Ohio, and you have to take some combination in that period of 6, so in other words, 2 3-credit university courses, and those can be courses on teaching or pedagogy. They can also be content-related courses, and or some combination up to 18 continuing education unit credits as one of the preconditions, and good standing and other things. So to my mind, if you had an interest in this topic, or even if you were looking for a fully online option, you didn't want to attend something in person. Again, the idea here is a teacher who is quite busy, in addition to all their professional responsibilities, family life, other things that all of us balance. The anytime accessible online option, I would imagine, would be attractive. So I don't think there should be any barriers for anyone to take that class. Yeah.
How did you decide on 3 units? I mean, it seems like a lot more than 3 credits.
So the
question is, how did you decide on 3 credits? It
Yeah.
seems like a lot more than 3 credits.
So I spoke with colleagues in our education department, and it's based on contact hours. So the standard formula in the education field, and I believe this is true also for certification, is that 1 CEU is equivalent to 10 contact hours. And by contact hours, that implies engagement with the material, reading, working through the material, and so forth. It is not an exact science. I worked through this class when I started to put it together, and roughly tried to calculate how much time it would take me to watch the videos, to read the content that I had assigned, to take the quiz if I failed it the first time, and I got to retake it. And so this is a best estimate at 3 CEU credits based on 10-hour contact hours per 1 CEU credit hour. That was the formula. Yes, here, and then there, yeah. Oh.
First of all, thank you for this outstanding presentation without an How do you do that?
Well, I don't know if I didn't do that.
In the videos particularly, I found very powerful. Do the teachers who sign up for the course and complete the course, do they have access to use your videos in teaching their students?
Yep. So one of the things that I want to do is, because in a way it's contributing to the kind of sharing of knowledge on the topic. So one of the things I was very grateful for is to be able to use this, and I didn't even show that tonight, but is this online course, Holocaust, History of the Holocaust textbook from Penn State University. People spent quite a bit of time putting this together. It's not the best, but it's not terrible. And it fits pretty well with a number of the units that I have in the class. And they've done that completely free of charge, and they make it available to anyone who wants to use it for teaching purposes. So, I mean, if somebody wants to use my video in their classroom, they're welcome to do it.
Hinda and I have been having the following conversation for years and years and years.
Okay.
I have been teaching Holocaust for many, many, many years. And one of my pet peeves is in content, we have to teach on how they died. There's no question. But in my opinion, we don't nearly teach enough about how they lived.
I agree with that.
How they lived, the resiliency, the kindness, the stories that my aunt told me, and I don't think of course we have to know about anti-Semitism in this chambers, but what about, if I could change the word Holocaust survivor, it would be Holocaust heroes. So for me, we don't talk enough about how they lived.
Both before, during, and after as well. And I agree with that. One of the things in this course that I'm working on right now is it is specifically devoted to, I like the idea of heroes. I refer to them as survivors in that course. Is to try to capture the incredible diversity of that experience. One of the things that I do try to do in this course with some of the videos I showed you, and this is true of all of my classes, is that sometimes we flatten out the experience of the Holocaust and we say Hitler and the Nazis come to power, Hitler and the Nazis hated Jews, Hitler and the Nazis killed Jews. And we don't spend nearly enough time thinking about the incredibly difficult process of disentangling and pulling an entire people out of a society of which they have been a part for hundreds and hundreds of years. These were, in this particular case, in Germany or other countries, these were Germans who, as many of them thought, who happened to be of the Jewish faith, or culturally, or their background, or even if they were not observant or practicing, whatever it would be. And sometimes when we flatten out that history, we almost create the impression that Jewish people, Jewish Germans, were some kind of almost not human or different people. They were simply Germans who happened to believe, and in some cases practice, slightly different cultural or dietary or religious practices than other Germans. One of the survivor videos that I've used in some of my other UToledo classes, he talks about his father, a gentleman who talks about his father who was ultimately deported and murdered, and his father fought in the German army and was decorated in the First World War, and constantly harangued this gentleman and his brother about German patriotism and pride, and also being proud Jewish Germans as well. And so I think your point is excellent, and to try to capture as much of that experience as possible is tremendously important, and you're absolutely right. Yep.
I have a question. I've just
yes, in the back, and then here. Yep.
Until it's a mandate or standard, it's not you know, everything that we're doing here and everything we've worked on so hard, the teachers are going to want it to be something towards the standard that they're required to teach. My question to you is, what's the difference between the word mandate and standard?
That is a great question. Are you an educator? Yes. Okay.
Is it the body that produces it? Is it the body? Like the standards were groups of teachers got together and provided the Ohio standards.
Yep.
And then they went away for a while. And the PSAT, what were they called? Proficiency tests, and then they go away. And this is what a teacher has to teach too.
So there is some interesting scholarship on this question. The simple answer to this, and again, I am not an expert, your knowledge is probably much greater than mine on this particular topic, but it varies widely based on the language that is actually adopted. For example, I showed you the language for the Oklahoma mandate. That is about as broad and general. It just says you have to do something in Holocaust education. So in that regard, as I understand it, the mandate does not demand particular standards in the way that standards would be written in that context. Something like the Michigan mandate is much more explicit. It mentions not only the Holocaust, but also the Armenian genocide. So if you're talking about that, it gets you a little bit further down the road of what types of content areas you might teach and what the standards for those content areas might be. I don't know, I have no insider knowledge. I know in talking with some of the members of the Ohio legislature that there was strong interest when I was there in January in moving forward with this. There can be strong interest in lots of things and it never happens. So I cannot say one way or the other if that is on the front burner, the back burner, and it's in the refrigerator and not on the stove. That I don't know, but that question I think varies a lot by the nature of the mandate language and is really interesting. By comparison, and this is one of the reasons I mentioned this is an area of maybe an article that I would like to work on with a colleague there in Austria. They are much more explicit about linking mandates with what we would think of as specific teaching standards. For example, Austria and Germany do much more about grade level standards and learning outcomes that are specifically related to what is taught, how it is taught at what level, what is grade appropriate, when you visit individual concentration camps, which is all part of the curriculum. It is much more robust. Now the bigger question is, and this is where there's not as much research, how does all of this, how do we measure over time longitudinally, how do we measure over time how mandates and standards on a particular topic actually lead to learning? Because one of the criticisms that I've read in a couple of education articles about mandates in general is, and I'm simplifying this a great deal, here's a mandate, do this. The teachers say, I don't know anything about topic X. I don't have the resources to teach topic X. I'm already pressed for time to do topics L, M, NOP, and everything else that I'm doing. Now you're asking me to create a new net topic on something that I don't know anything about. What is going to be the quality of the content and the delivery of that content to students when it's just a mandate? So we need, I think, that is an interesting and compelling argument to say mandates are important, but mandates are not the end all of what robust teaching, in this case of the Holocaust, could be.
I think there's many people in this room that might sign up for your course, but we're not teaching other students.
It is open to anyone. I've had multiple emails from people who said, do I need to be a teacher to take it? You've seen part of it already. You're welcome to take the rest of it. Yes?
Yes, my question is, as far as the University of Toledo is concerned, many of the teachers that are now teaching in our school systems are graduates I
Yep.
presume, of our university. So is there a major or minor that one can take in the College of Education in Holocaust studies and education and all of the things that you've been referring to?
Not in education, but the other part of this, in addition to this online teacher training I did, was a new minor that is now available since last year at the University of Toledo in Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and we've had several students who have enrolled in that minor. It's across, it resides in our college, but it's across the university. In theory, anyone who is interested in the topic from engineering to whatever could sign up for that minor.
If you can grow a decent population of students at the university level, when they become teachers, they will become interested, they will sign up, and they will tell their friends about it, and you don't have to make phone calls to people you know to try to promote this. It'll happen naturally.
I very much like that idea. A question back here, and then Alan. Yep.
We're going to put your teaching to work. What happened to the top company? And you referenced the museum and their foundation. What happened?
How much time do you have? It's a, yeah, okay, yeah, because we should probably. The long story short is that area of Germany was occupied initially by the Americans. They gave up what is today Thuringia, and the Soviets moved in, and it was occupied by the Soviets. So the two living brothers, top brothers, this was a family business, escaped. One of them ended up going to what became West Germany and tried to refound the Topf company, because the Soviets, and not just the Topf company, but other industries in what would become East Germany, the Soviets seized private businesses and companies and either nationalized them or closed them, packed them up, and shipped them to the Soviet Union as reparations. The Topf company itself, the physical buildings and the engineering center and the construction works were boxed up and sent to the Soviet Union. One of the brothers ultimately ended up committing suicide. A number of those engineers who I talked about and showed you images of were arrested and deported to the Soviet Union and put on trial. One of them was executed. One of them received a long prison sentence and died in prison. But the Soviets kept pretty meticulous records, which could only be accessed after the fall of communism. So there is a whole other history to this, which goes into much more detail about what we found out in areas of this, what had originally been the Soviet occupation zone of Germany, and the huge amount of documents that the Soviets collected that were not really well known at all in the West until the collapse of communism. And in spite of one of the Topf brothers' attempt to restart the Topf company in West Germany, they ran into financial difficulty, and by the end of the 1960s, the company closed completely. So the Topf company does not exist anymore. It couldn't happen to a better.
Three different questions.
Okay.
Number one, do you cover Holocaust by bullets?
Yeah.
Number two is, has there been an effect of the merging of the education and liberal arts colleges? Has that had an impact on the way this shakes out? And number three, what kind of students have signed up for the minor?
I do not know all of them. I know 3 who have signed up so far. History and political science are the background of the 3 that I know. I can't comment on, I'm going in reverse, your questions. I'm taking your last one first. Your middle one, on the merger, I will defer to my boss. And I did, yes, correct. And that has been tremendously helpful to me navigating the whole idea of how we calculate, to your earlier question about CEUs and credits. That came out of a conversation that I had with somebody in social studies education in the Department of Education. I would say in general, my experience with that merger, the merger has been excellent and has been beneficial for what I'm doing, but I don't have the big picture view. But for my own firsthand experience with it, it's been excellent. What's that?
You have a good dean.
I agree with that assertion. The first question you asked about the Holocaust by bullets, I do not deal with that in this class, except to mention that is in section 3, where I talk about the Wannsee Conference, and I talk in my video there, I do mention the Holocaust by bullets. I did not show that one tonight, where I talk about the shift from mass shooting and what has been called the Holocaust by bullets to eventually, although that didn't disappear or go away entirely, but the idea of setting up a extermination camp system to speed up and to expand the mass killing that took place in Eastern Europe. So I mention it in that section where I'm talking, I'm giving that mini lecture in front of the Wannsee House. But that's what I have on that particular question, the Holocaust by bullets. One more question if someone has it, and then we should probably, yeah. Okay, we can, but yeah.
Hello. All right. So I think my question is kind of tying the idea of mandate standards, but also the discourse on content, right? That this program is teaching teachers, right, and instructors across Toledo schools. How does the program accommodate the different levels within the school system, right? Insofar as the depth in which teachers can be equipped to deal with different subject matter to different extents based on the audience that they're teaching.
So that is a great question, and it is a question that I struggled with. And there are, Yad Vashem, for example, has some interesting sort of what they have done in terms of age-appropriate material and content. In other words, how could you teach about an extermination camp to an 8th grade class as opposed to a 11th or 12th grade class? So that exists, and as I was going through and putting this course together, I thought about, is there a way of layering and trying to do each one of these topics with a grade appropriate level, kind of an advisory for if you're a teacher that does grade X, here's how you could do this. And it became impossibly complex. So my short answer to you is, in some ways, my expectation is by presenting this content and making it available, my expectation, and some of those teaching resources that I provide at the end of this class do some grade level. One of them is that Yad Vashem link that I mentioned. Do some grade level appropriate teaching, but some of it is also relying on the teachers themselves to say, this is useful for me in terms of content. There's no way I could do something like the top company for a class of 8th graders, maybe, that would not be appropriate. So some of it is honestly me leaving that to the discretion of teachers that would take that and providing the content. But it's a great question. I will also freely admit that particular aspect, that aspect of pedagogy and grade level appropriate teaching isn't necessarily my area of expertise. So it would require further differentiation within a course that already has a fair amount of content. But it's a great question. Thanks.